Hi, my name is Jeffro, and this is Digital Dominance, the podcast for service-based small business owners who are ready to seize the recognition and growth that their company deserves. You've worked hard to build a business you're proud of. Now it's time for Digital Domination. Welcome back to Digital Dominance. Today, we're tackling what has become one of the most transformative forces in media and marketing, AI. My guest is Pete Pachal, the founder and CEO of the Media Copilot, where he explores how generative AI is reshaping the media landscape. He has years of experience in journalism and senior roles at CoinDesk and Mashable. And Pete now helps professionals and organizations harness AI to upgrade their work and navigate all of the implications that come with it. So in this episode, we'll dive into the rise of AI-generated summaries, the blurring line between real and artificial images, and how these changes are impacting small business marketing. Pete, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, my pleasure, Jeffro. Glad to be here.
Yeah, Pete, AI continues to change so many industries at an impressive pace, and I'm excited to dig into how these shifts are also creating new challenges and opportunities for small businesses in particular. So that's what we'll talk about today.
Cool. Yeah, I'm totally down for it.
How do you see AI reshaping the way people consume media and information?
Right. That's a big, let's start with the small questions, right?
I know.
So AI is rapidly becoming this layer between, information and the way people get it. It's basically a disintermediary, as they sort of talk about, right? So there's all this info, like articles, whatever it is. And previous to AI, how you would sort that out is Google, right? You Google it, okay, you get a bunch of links, you click on a few that look interesting, you read bits of them, figure out the thing that is unique to each one, and you form in your head some version of what you were looking for, whether that was news or whether it was like the best recommendations for a peppermint vodka martini or what have you, right? And so now AI has come in and said, look, I'm going to do that for you. I'm going to do the Googling and check it out, and I'm going to summarize all that information and just kind of give it to you and give you like the short version of that. And that's no doubt that is helpful, right? For a lot of queries. So it's essentially removing friction, which is what technology does. Of course, it invites a whole host of questions, which is, which of those links is it looking at? Is it biased in its selections? Is it accurate? And, what does it mean when we start to get this, average of everything out there as opposed to sort of looking for it for ourselves? These are all sort of, honestly, existential questions to the information ecosystem. And the technology is getting better, but it still has all of these sort of implications for the people creating the information and for the people consuming it. So it's a big deal. Probably the biggest sea change since the printing press, honestly. That's not really much of an exaggeration.
Well, and I heard recently about how many searches now are not leaving the search results page because, as you mentioned, those summaries from AI are answering the question. So they don't need to click on anything. But now is where the gray area comes in, right? Because like you said, are there biases? How is the algorithm picking which ones to look at? Is it assessing AI written content from these sources? Is it human written? Do we know? Now it's AI interpreting AI. So what do we do from here? Yeah.
Yeah, that's all happening, and it's all a concern. And it's still early days. So I feel like a lot of using AI, and whether it's to create content, well, particularly what to create content. Let's look at that, zero in on like people creating content with AI. I think that is something that is essentially taking this AI written stuff, and inserting it into a Web 2 world where the laws are all about social reach and search functionality. And it's going to become, and it already has become, really, really easy to game that. Like the cost of content is going to zero. You can get AIs to summarize things, you can publish them, and then just think you've done your job. The problem is, the filters are getting better. Essentially, like if all you're doing is putting out AI generated, slop, so to speak, you're going to get downranked, whether it's your site or yourself or whatever. And the volume of that content is getting so large that it's a lot of it's just kind of like getting filtered out. It doesn't make any difference. So you got to do something better if you're going to try to stand out and, market your stuff and get in these sort of AI summaries. Because what these AI engines are looking for is stuff that's unique. It's stuff that's differentiated. It's stuff that's definitive. And if you want to sort of play this new game of SEO, which is like the AI overview, the summarization, you really have to offer real value. And then so in this sense, I think AI as kind of a filtering mechanism is actually somewhat healthy for the ecosystem, right? Even though on the other end, I was just describing the slop, but I think it's pretty good at finding out what is slop, on the other end. So while it's a helpful tool in parts of the content production process, if you're not bringing anything human and unique to the content in the first place, I don't think it's going to help you much.
Yeah, you always have to have a human in there to at least review it before posting and add something original, because if it is just pulling from other sources, then we also need to talk about the copyright issues and privacy. And even, let's say you do create your own content, do you need to protect your own content from the AI, kind of summarizing it, putting it out there as its own?
Right. Yeah, that's a huge deal. So the thing about what we were just talking about, if your content is summarized and it's put in one of these sort of overviews or whatever, the people interacting with that generally look at it and leave, right? They're not clicking through, they're not converting, so to speak. So what is really the value of it if that's happening? Now, it's early days again, but it looks like when Google puts out some of these AI overviews, these summaries at the top of search pages, that the people that do click are really engaged, that they're obviously the people who want to go beyond the summary. So there's that. There's going to be some of that, but it's going to be a lot less than what you used to have. So I think one of the things that AI is disrupting via all this summarization is how commerce has been done on the internet up until now. So you usually have sites like, whether it's the Wirecutter or what have you, talk about what products are good to buy. You go there, you click on a transaction link, and then there's the commission that goes to the site and other people sort of in the process, right? Well, now with AI, and it's just giving you a recommendation, that's kind of severed to some extent. Now, what I think is going to happen is there's going to be some standard version of that within AI summaries, which is just going to be a much narrower collection of links, right? So it's going to be a lot more competitive, or really less competitive if you think about it. In other words, I think only a couple of sites will end up surviving in terms of these recommendation engines, and then they'll sort of end up putting the link through, right? Because whatever there's money to be made, someone's going to figure out a technology to make it. So I think that's going to happen, but again, it's early days right now.
Yeah, that's interesting because the affiliate marketing industry, has been really big. I think it's been shrinking, and stuff like this is going to make it shrink further. To your point, because if you don't have the volume, or the history to compete against these top sites, then you have no chance.
Well, also Google has been recently merciless about people abusing their SEO domain authority, a little separate from AI, but they're trying to get at this idea of you're, say, People magazine, and you have a really strong URL, a lot of SEO clout, then you can just start reviewing air purifiers or putting up air purifier reviews and getting some of that commerce. And that doesn't seem right. So they've kind of tried to cut back on that. But what that means is now there's fewer sites with all this actually having reviews of this stuff up. I think that's generally might be a good thing, let's, make sure the people who are real specialists in this and have real unique and hands-on insights to offer are highlighted. And so again, in some of these ways, I think AI can be kind of healthy because arguably it's a little more discerning than just sort of a Google search, right?
Yeah. It also increases the barrier to entry for people, though. Like you said, you have to be more committed, doing this for a longer time, and be an actual expert before you can go around touting stuff or selling people on things. I mean, you still can to a certain extent, but at least not through this mechanism, right? It's going to be harder for you to fake that.
Yeah. You'd have to stick to TikTok, probably. It's all about the incentives of the platform and the rewards of them, right? And I'm sure TikTok's going to have its own shakeout at some point because it's kind of become TikTok shop. And yeah, we'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah. Well, I do like how on the Google AI summary and now in ChatGPT too, I'm seeing more of the citations. When it is pulling from a direct source, it at least gives you a link. So still not perfect, but it's at least trying now. And I have a feeling that'll just get better.
Right. So yeah, AI-powered search is essentially what it's slowly evolving into, which is great because previously, well, it still is. So ChatGPT obviously goes into its knowledge base when you ask it questions and gives you summaries of things. And it could always browse the web in a limited way. But now in the last, I think it's the last couple months, they released generally their search function. So it can actually actively search the web. Now, this is great for a couple of reasons. One, it's probably less hallucination prone. Like when it goes into its knowledge base to give you something about, say, like the French Revolution or whatever, it's, looking at the entire world's knowledge on that. Some of the stuff's going to be contradictory, and it's mixing in a lot of other stuff too. So this is where like an AI tends to be generally correct about something, but it, gets things wrong like dates or names, and you got to go check those out yourself. When it's more general web search on a specific topic, particularly for news, there isn't usually as much stuff out there to get confused by, and the narratives sort of tend to go in a certain direction. And also, it's a language task. It's not going into its knowledge base anymore. So it's dependent on the accuracy of the information that it's looking at, but generally it doesn't hallucinate as much. So that's helpful. The other part is that then now news sources can be cited, like you said. So there's that again, there's not really a lot of traffic because of the summarization nature of it, but what is slowly emerging now is this new economy around it, because OpenAI is pursuing licensing deals with all these publishers. Perplexity, which also does AI-powered search, obviously, they're doing something a little different. It's a rev share. So there's these ways that people are trying to start the engine on making sure content creators get paid, because that's the big question here, right? Which is like, is it actually okay for AI engines to go out and crawl and index the web and ingest all this stuff? The courts haven't really firmly come down on one side or the other. Everyone's looking, again, at sort of Web 2.0 precedent, which said it was okay, but that was back when you got traffic. So now that bargain is broken, is it okay anymore? We don't know yet. We'll see. The New York Times is suing OpenAI over this. News Corp is suing Perplexity over it. It's a big deal. So one of the downsides of the licensing question, so like OpenAI and others have proactively gone out and tried to license content, is that you only will get news from organizations of a certain size that are essentially worth going out and making a deal with, right? So if you're a smaller publisher, if you're an independent publisher, if you're an individual, they're probably not going to answer your emails about having a deal with you. So I think that's unfortunate because, one, you either won't get that information in the summary or the search because these publishers will block their content, or they will be there and they simply won't be compensated for it. Now, there's a number of like startups out there right now that are trying to create like essentially an economy around this. So what you would do, you'd put your content on a marketplace, and then in a sort of large scalable self-serve fashion, like an AI company could just say, I want to buy all of that content or portions of it from this particular vendor, this middleman, right? And there's a few companies that are doing that now. I'm hopeful for that because as an independent individual contributor, I want to see that sort of thing succeed, but I think they still have to sort of figure out how this is going to shake out on the high level before that really gets going.
Right, because but that still sounds like it's a gatekeeper, right? It might be a different gatekeeper that you have to follow this marketplace's rules to get your stuff through. I'm wondering if there's a better, more scalable way to do that someone's going to come up with, and it could be as simple as .org and adding additional schema so that you can pass through your affiliate relationships or proprietary stuff that if you got a trademark or a patent on this, highlighting that so that AI doesn't just say, oh yeah, you can do this, anybody can, right? And so there might be ways to do that just, okay, I update my website and now AI knows.
Yeah, exactly. So that is kind of what some of these places are sort of trying to create, since it's less about the individual deals and more about something that's self-serve, that you can just go in and sort of mark your stuff and you don't really even have to get on the phone with anybody or whatever. So once one of these startups, for example, I think it's called Tollbit, and it's essentially a really quick upgrade to your site, whether it's a WordPress site or whatever, and then it sort of marks the content in the sort of fashion that you are describing. And then like if a crawler comes along, there's sort of this automatic thing that happens. And you'd have to sort of just make sure you're connected to the toll gatekeeper, so to speak, but it should be scalable. There's no reason it couldn't be.
Yeah, and hopefully, SEO agencies will start to adopt some of these platforms and technologies and just kind of bring that under their wing so that a small business owner doesn't need to learn all this stuff, but they can just have their team do it and know that it's going to be taken care of.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole idea of like SEO for chatbots is very new. You know, I don't think that anyone really knows what is the formula for getting in a chatbot summary. The best definition I've heard is that it's definitive. Get something that is unique, that does, you know, basically I would define it as like, if you were to write the ultimate summary, the Encyclopedia Britannica on this topic, your information is something they couldn't leave out. So in other words, it's going to encourage more unique and hopefully human written takes on things. And with that, you know, gives me a little hope. And then like, it's like, okay, that was something we used to call good journalism, when you have something new and fresh, whether it's new information or a scoop of insight or whatever. So if AI alters the incentives that is what it values, hopefully we'll see less of what I would consider sort of the aggregated junk of the past, you know, last decade or so, where, you know, I used to work at Mashable, and I'm certainly guilty of this, of writing my own version of a Twitter React story. You know, like somebody did something in the news and a bunch of people on Twitter said something about it. And if I ever told myself I was doing actual journalism there, I'll tell you this, I was wrong. That's what I would consider a virus in terms of a piece of content. So if AI disincentivizes that kind of quick hit, lazy aggregation, you know, style of content, then so much the better.
Yeah. And I'm all for that. I've always been pretty much optimistic about new technologies and even AI. And a lot of people can get freaked out like, oh no, AI is going to ruin everything. But I think as long as we have smart people working on this, it's going to get better. Like, yes, it might be messy in the short term, but in the long term, like you said, it's actually going to drive higher quality content and force people to be better and not just, you know, race to the bottom, this lowest common denominator where who can spit out the cheapest, fastest stuff. It's going to actually get better. So that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that you know, not to throw cold water on anything, but, you know, there's the other side of it, which is that there's what I would say is a fine line between use of AI and abuse of AI. Right. And that's kind of where things can go wrong, because, you know, as a user of it, you know, in getting summaries, you may trust it too much and then rely on something that was either, even if it's correct, maybe not the best information for whatever reason. And certainly if you're creating content, you know, it can easily become a crutch, even though it has a lot to offer in terms of efficiencies, a content creation process. So like whether it's giving you ideas for stories, whether it's, you know, enabling you to do a kind of content you couldn't do before. Like great example of this is Google Notebook LM, which essentially creates podcasts out of documents or even just ideas. That's really interesting. And, you know, or just the distribution of it where you're promoting your stuff on social or optimizing it for SEO. AI can offer all of these stages of content, like a lot you can use, but once you get to sort of an undisciplined use of it and you're just kind of like using it to write your stories and do all that, like, and you're kind of like not even really involved, that's going to get you to the slop place, right? Which hopefully, like I said before, the filters and the incentives will discourage.
Well, that's kind of a good point, as we can move into like looking at imagery, right? Because that line between real and AI generated stuff is getting harder to detect, but there's always been complaints around like copyrights and how it's just stealing people's art. But what are your thoughts on the implications of this when it comes to small business marketing and just the internet in general?
Yeah, the AI image question is probably illustrates the economic problem more than any other content, because once you have these AI image engines, which are super common now, you have Midjourney, DALL-E, Meta even now, and they can create, you know, images to represent your story or your concept immediately, like within seconds. What hope is there for stock imagery anymore? You know, like, I mean, people who like, as soon as I did my first DALL-E image, it's like, why would I ever use Getty again? Well, obviously for news purposes, there's a lot of reasons to use Getty, but for a lot of time, like a lot of my journalism career, you're often hunting for something to illustrate an abstract concept. Like you mentioned at the beginning, I worked at CoinDesk. One of the big problems with doing markets coverage is there's a lot, did number go up, number go down? Like how many graphs can you put out there? And you just need images. So like, hey, AI is great for generating these sort of abstract images. And yet you sort of go like, well, wait a minute, we used to use stock imagery for that. What happens to them? What about using images in the style of an artist? That doesn't seem quite right, but you can easily do that. I think they're starting to put safety safeguards on things. So using imagery, it's a bit of a dilemma still now. And I think every business needs to, come down with some kind of AI policy that fulfills that need for imagery, but also has an eye to the long term and to being fair, right? So there's various AI resources, AI powered resources that do think about this and try to come out and be ethical about it. So I'm hesitant to recommend them, but there's a couple of, Adobe has famously sort of come out and said that, it's going to respect content rights and make sure it's not going to train on its own users' images, but also that the rights that it's purchasing from stock imagery are going to include this. So that they're trying, right? As opposed to, and also its Firefly models are not trained on public domain data. That's the big thing. That's what sort of a lot of these image companies, whether it's Midjourney or whatever, have clearly done. They've clearly just sort of harvested tons of images that are out there publicly available and created their models on that. So as you sort of think about what you're going to use, you might think about which service you're going to use, but also how you're going to use it. Like use it in these kinds of articles, but maybe not these. I know places, publications that allow some limited use of generative imagery, but forbid asking for the style of a particular artist or photographer. That's off limits. And that seems kind of like a reasonable compromise to me, because again, there's the big factor you need to also take into account is if you're going to take a stand from any kind of ethical standpoint, you're going to have to understand there are going to be competitors who don't. And that's not an excuse for you to do whatever you want, but it is sort of a factor you have to sort of think about as you're doing this stuff. Just full confession, I use generative imagery in my newsletter and various other places. Again, I'm a one-man show. Mostly I'm a solopreneur, and again, that's not an excuse, but it is kind of if I were to use imagery to illustrate a news event, I would probably want to go to some legit source like Getty or something like that, right? Because you kind of don't want to get into this zone where you don't know, like as you said at the beginning, whether it's real or not. And that's a very dicey line to cross. And this started to happen with some wartime coverage. I think it was with the Israel-Gaza war early on. And some people were publishing stories, but they would use, I don't think the people publishing the stories even knew the image was fully generative. I don't know, I might be misremembering, but it was sort of like more generic wartime imagery. And that's a really tough one. I think there's a strong case to be made that if you're doing sort of wartime reporting, unless there's some, I can't think of what it would be, but some big extemporaneous circumstance, I think, you'd want to stick with real imagery or just don't use anything.
Well, and this is something that, people didn't have to think about before, right? You used to just slap something on there, go to one of the free stock photo sites. But now, there's all these implications that you got to worry about. So hopefully... I'm old enough
to remember the early days of the internet where a lot of people would just slap anything on, copyright or not. And that quickly became like, hey, you can't just grab a photo from Google image search. Like that's somebody's photo. And that obviously that's the early days of the internet, but that did, it takes a while to get sort of the publicly educated about this.
And that still happens. I think even at large organizations, they might have an intern or somebody in there who's supposed to publish an article and they, grabbed a photo from Associated Press or something. And then a couple months later, they see an email with like a lawsuit or something about the copyright. Like, take it down.
Yeah. Well, it can be quite expensive for each instance. So I think I used to be chief of staff at CoinDesk. I would get those emails, and usually they're if it goes to court, it could be as much as $10,000, for instance.
Yeah, some of those law firms, it depends on the way they handle it. Some of them are just like trolling, I think, how to get people, which is not fun. But obviously, they have legitimate stuff too.
I had to deal with those. There are legit problems and like issues, and then you have to sort of figure out the right solution. But there are definitely folks who just troll, and I've had emails about stuff that was clearly Creative Commons, for example, and someone would try to shake us down for it. There's a lot of automated services out there. You got to be discerning, but Some of them are legit.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me today, Pete. We're near the end of our time. AI is always fascinating. I appreciate your insights. For those of you listening, if you need an AI training consultant, Pete's links will be in the show notes, and he will give you a discount if you use the code ThinkAI. I have one last question for you, Pete. Most of what we talk about is all the generative stuff, is large language models. At some point, inevitably, we're going to actually have real artificial intelligence. What are your thoughts on either how far away that is, or what's the change that's going to come as a result of that?
Good question. Okay, so I am not an insider in Silicon Valley or OpenAI or any of these places, so I don't know what they got in their skunk works. That said, from what I have seen and where things are going, I do not see what people are fearing as either general intelligence or super intelligence happening anytime soon. I feel like there is no spark there. There is no thing that is going to instigate an intent. That's the thing about AI. There was a brilliant essay in the New Yorker a couple months ago by a guy named Ted Chiang, an artist, and he talked about how AI doesn't have intent. And that's one of the reasons it's not ever going to be valued as much as human content. I thought that was a very insightful comment. So my view is that's really far out. Like, we're talking like sentient computers. I just don't see it happening. That said, these agents and the autonomous systems that they're slowly becoming can still be dangerous and can still be quite capable of a lot of things. So it's not a reason to sort of not be concerned about that kind of thing. But so I put probably more faith than most. I know this might sound naive in sort of the tech companies and how they're thinking about this. And this is mostly based on interviews with folks like, Sam Altman and the CEO of Anthropic. Like, they are really looking closely at these levels of automation and what they need to do to ensure safety. But I also think there's a good sort of utopian view of this. It's like, as long as we can make sure the proper safeguards in place, they could solve a lot of big problems simply by putting them to work on those problems and enlisting all the help they can possibly get from other AIs, mostly to work on them. So I don't think we're going to get super intelligence for, probably a century or more. That said, I think AI is going to help us solve some really big problems in the next 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, thank you again for being here, Pete. Thanks to all you guys for listening. If you thought this was valuable, please leave a review for the show on Apple or Spotify. I look forward to seeing you guys all again next time. So take care and have a good one. Thanks for tuning in to the Digital Dominance Podcast. This show is brought to you by FroBro.com. If you are a B2B service provider and you're ready to transform your website into a high-converting, lead-generating sales tool, go to FroBro.com/revive to learn more.